And we are going to have a look at the A-Wing. Now, this is the second A-Wing I've actually built. And overall, I am really, really impressed with Bandai as a company. I haven't done a lot of their Gundams. I've never actually finished one. I've had a couple on the shelf, and I've started one about halfway through. And it was always fun, but I really liked the Space Battleship Yamato stuff. I built a couple of the ships from that line, and they were the first snap-together kits I've ever built that weren't a joke. Because normally with companies, when they had a snap-together line, it was never very good. Bandai has taken a completely different approach on that, and their design philosophy so often is really interesting and clever. So I've been really impressed with everything they've been doing in the last probably 10 years is when they really picked their game up. Although I guess, but that's only from my experience. I'm sure some of the Gundam guys might say, no, they started getting better, well before then. So I was very excited when they actually got the Star Wars license. Overall, they've done a fair bit with it, and I hope they keep doing it. The last few releases have been variations. I don't know if that's a reflection on they've not been excited about the stuff in the movies, or if it's just they've been working on bigger projects, and those bigger projects take more time, so it's easier to do something like the Executioner, First Order Stormtrooper, which was a variation, and Phasma, which was a variation, to fill the release schedule until they do the new stuff like the B-Wing coming out. The A-Wing is actually a reasonably simple kit and a reasonably small kit. It's not going to take you ages to do, and it's not loaded with parts. It's actually a very good kit if you want to get a kid into the hobby, or if you have someone who hasn't built a lot of stuff before, because they're going to finish it in a reasonably short period of time, and it's going to go together and come together pretty quickly, which is good when it's someone who's excited. They're just starting the hobby. They don't always want to have something massively complicated. So they come in the regular soft box. They do their own artwork, which is nice, but I've never kept it. It's not quite on the same level as the old Matchbox and Airfix boxes, the art that they had on those. They always really stood out. These are functional, they work, but I don't keep these ones generally for my wall. Opening it up, it comes in a couple of bags, hard, scrunchy plastic bags that the Bandai seems to use. They have the multicoloured plastic, the clear sprue is connected to the others. It's really interesting, and I've seen interviews. They take quite a lot of pride in this manufacturing that they do. The instructions are typical Bandai, which for the most part are easy to follow. There's every now and again there's something that gets a little bit complicated when you get two parts that look very similar. They do tend to not always have two exactly the same pieces. Now sometimes I think that is. I think in the picture there we have the undercarriage doors closed, and I think they are actually the same piece, like just reversed. But a lot of the time you'll get one will have one nick in it sort of thing, or one sort of tab, and the other will have the tab in a slightly different way. So technically you can only get it the right way. We usually get it wrong when it doesn't fit, and then we apply a lot more force. And then when you actually try it the other way, it just goes straight in, which is nice. It's more to do with we have to just pay more attention to the instructions. And one thing that I noticed, the early ones didn't, I'm pretty sure, but after a certain point we start getting more English as well as the Japanese in the instructions. You get decals and you get stickers. And this causes a lot of ire sometimes from certain groups, but I don't really understand why, because both are included. If you just want to build it, or if you're a kid and you just want to throw it together and not even worry about painting it in any way, it does come pre-coloured for the standard A-Wing on the box. You paint that, you take the stickers off, you whack it on, you got yourself a kit. If you want to do decals, you can go with the decals. One thing, and probably the only really big complaint I have about Bandai, is their decals kind of suck. So I'm not sure. I don't very often use their decals. None of their big ones, because they don't seem to sit down very well. Starting to look at the kit, the one thing you can see is the detail is very nice. Now, one complaint that has been made is that the detail is, in some people's opinion, exaggerated. I won't tell them they're wrong. The panel lines are kind of heavy, but on the other hand, this is only a 172 kit. It's not very big. So I feel that they sort of exaggerate the detail sometimes, so it's going to be seen in this scale. If this was 132 and it was really deep and heavy, I think it's a very valid complaint. But in 172, I don't think it's that big a deal. Comes with some nice rivets you can see, and it's got some nice little raised detail here and there. Apparently they base all of their models off the studio stuff, which is good and bad. It's good because you're looking at a level of accuracy. It's bad because sometimes the studio guys cut some corners that were designed strictly for the film that wouldn't necessarily be on the real vehicle, and from a modelling point of view wouldn't necessarily need that. One of those is the Y-Wing has no rear glass, and that rear glass wasn't there apparently because you could see the reflection of the cameras in the Y-Wing rear glass, so they took it out for the shots in the trench run. But because that's the studio model, Bandai replicated that, even though a Y-Wing would actually have rear glass. Comes with a seated pilot. Very nice. I love the fact that they give you options. I wish all companies would do this. Really, I think the only other one is Airfix that gives you pretty heavily the option of gear up and pilots in most kits they do. There's every now and again they do something weird where you don't get it, but basically most of their kits they release actually give you the option of gear up and pilot or gear down. And it's cool. It's all about option. If you want to do it on a runway or you like the idea of gear down, you can do it. But if you want to do a flight scene or something, you got that option. Yeah, it's one big plus. I really like options, choices, giving modelers choices. I think it's just such a good thing, and Bandai does that. And this is the two parts of the tail section and the middle thrusters there. And this is the cockpit section. Most of it is all on this sprue. I think actually all the cockpit is on the sprue, along with parts of the engine and blaster housing. It also comes with the red lasers, which so many people seem to hate. But again, you don't have to include it. You can leave them off. So I don't really know why people hate them that much because of that. If it was integral to the kit in some way, I could understand your dislike. So this is engines on the left part there. That's the engines, and top and bottom of the main fuselage and the rear of the cockpit. Everything's color-coded, basically, to the parts of the kit that you're going to be working on. So this is why it's great for kids. So you don't have to worry about it. If they don't want to paint it, they just want to build and start flying around the house, shooting down TIE fighters. Let them go for it. Part of your engine housing, and I think that's your gear doors, up and down. You had two options with the canopy. One is open and one is closed. I've got to check because there was paintings, I think, that had the canopy split in the middle, slid back, and some opening like a BF-109 on a hinge. Now this is Return of the Jedi A-Wing, not Last Jedi A-Wing. So I don't know if there's a difference, but there's two options there on your canopy. This also created some debate online, and again, I'm not quite sure why. This is a turret at the bottom, like in the trench run. It's just included. Yes, it's out of scale, but it's just there. And actually, I think it's 1/144 scale, so if you end up with some of their other small line, the 144 fighters and that, you can actually build a bit of an interesting Death Star scene with these extra bits if you want. So work begins, and I started with spraying it grey, and everything just clicked down really easy. There was absolutely no problems at this stage of the build. Cockpit went together really well. It's not very in depth at all. You have two side panels. The picture doesn't actually show it, but there's detail on those side panels, buttons and switches kind of thing. You've got your main seat, and then the front console area. There's no stick. You don't really see it the way it is. I'm not sure how the A-Wings fly. I'm not sure we ever saw an image in Return of the Jedi of the pilots with with the control and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know if that's why they've left it off, or if they just couldn't be. I don't think Bandai never couldn't be bothered. There has to be a reason that there's no control stick included. This goes around the cockpit, and I wanted it to just stand out a little bit. I was sort of going with a more subdued paint scheme in the end. So I wanted a little bit of colour in there, and I want it to be different. I wasn't going to go with the red like on the box. So this was just to try to bring some colour into the centre section. So the cockpit is complete. The pilot goes in a little bit later on. I'm not sure why. I think you could put him in now and it wouldn't make any difference, but the instructions did call for a little bit later. Cockpit area itself was so easy to do. I just added a little bit of colour to some of the switches and the front part, and then on top of the console, the dash sort of area there. It's very small though, so if you're a really talented modeler, you can still do a hell of a lot in there, but it isn't very big. You don't have to really agonise over spending hours and hours on doing the cockpit. Now, if this was 132, you'd have a lot of area to play with. So one thing I do like about Bandai, which is car modelers tell me they've done this for ages. I don't really build cars. I've only working on a couple, and I can sort of see what they're talking about. But for me, Bandai was the first one where I built in sub-assemblies, where instead of building the kit to its completion and then painting it like we do typically with an aircraft, with Bandai you can build it in stages and paint it in stages. Now, the only danger of that isn't so much that it's not going to fit, because typically Bandai does. The Y-Wing was rather complicated, and I ran into a little bit of trouble with that here and there, but overall Bandai fits. So you trust the Bandai. When you're going to come to a piece and moving forward, you can trust that it's going to come together. The only thing is, you can sometimes look at a kit and think that an area is not going to be seen. Let's say on this one, down on the bottom there, just below where the green is, you sort of look at it and go, oh, yeah, you know what, there's going to be two parts going to come together and some side paneling. No one's going to see that. Now, in this case, that's true. There's a big piece that goes on the side and covers all of that. But at the same time, you can suddenly go, I'm not going to paint this, and then you hit a point later on and suddenly realize that when everything's together, some of the area you thought were going to be covered isn't. So the only danger with the sub-assemblies, not knowing what's always going to be visible and what's not. And yes, you can pull them apart. Some people do. But I find that once it goes together and it goes together really well, it's just best to leave it. So I try to just now, I sometimes overspray in the sense that I might spray areas that I don't think is going to be seen. If I know it's not going to be 100%, I won't. But if there's an area now I think, I don't know, that area may or may not be seen, I'll just spray it now as well, just to be on the safe side. The colour here I used is a new company called Splash, and they're automotive. They're lacquer paints, so don't let your kids use them. Lacquer is amazing paints. For me, the best quality finishes I ever get is with lacquer paints. But there's a downside, and they can be quite toxic. Even when they're not, well, I don't think there's ever a way you can have lacquer paint not be completely toxic. It is by its nature a very strong chemical. But they tend to stink too. That strong chemical aspect of them transfers also to how it smells, and that can be quite strong. Yeah, don't let your kids use any of the lacquer paints and stuff like that. Just keep them on the acrylics. But this was from Splash, and it was California Sage, and it was a beautiful color, and it was forgiving, and it sprayed well, and I really like where they're going with their paints. And I'm very happy that there's some alternative now. There's been a couple of companies that have been doing automotive paints, and they've been getting very, very high shipping costs and just bad customer service. So far, Splash has been pretty cool and interesting, and answering emails when you ask questions of them and that. And they've done some deals, which is nice. And they've also posted that if you bought their old black, they've just released a new version, and they were not doing a recall because there's nothing wrong with the first one, but as it's improved, if you have the first, they're going to give you a bottle of the new one. So that's pretty awesome. So I was happy to test this. We bought it, wasn't sponsored or anything, and I really liked it. It's cool. And I didn't use that much, so I've got a decent sized bottle there ready to throw at something else, maybe a battle droid. That could be interesting. These nice little pieces, they're horizontal, and they go in between the two main fuselage pieces. So I didn't know how much you'd see of them, but I painted them black and then gave them some weathering just to stand out. And in the end, you don't really see them tons, but it was alright. That's fine, no big deal. And that's them inserted. They give some extra strength, just sort of around that edge when you push the two fuselage halves together. And together. Easy. A little bit of force is needed, but if you shouldn't have to put a massive amount of force. You want to get that snug fit, and you want it to come down to be as close together as possible. And usually you'll know when you've got it right, because it will just sort of suck itself in when you get that last click. So yeah, the fuselage came together brilliantly, and it was at this point too I start to see the A-wing coming together, so I was pretty happy with that. Cockpit just went straight in. At this stage, really, that's the joy of it. There's no areas that were difficult to work with. The whole process so far had been really easy and really nice, and that's why I completely recommend Bandai for kids and that. They've got to be patient still. They do. There is still sometimes a bit of complexity. The Y-Wing was a staggeringly complex kit for what I expected it to be. Anyone building really complex cars and tanks and planes, they're used to some of this. If you're only a Bandai builder, the Y-Wing was a bit of a surprise. But the A-Wing was pretty much a dream from beginning to end. I used a MiG from Ammo, a blue, because I wanted to do some chipping and weathering, and I like his stuff for that. I didn't want to do massive amounts, I have to do a different type of weathering over the California Sage. You can't do this in the same way. This is a completely acrylic. This is your contrast actually on this kit. The lacquer stuff is just not good for your lungs, and this one was completely acrylic, and you use water. You can use water to thin it. I didn't. There isn't actually a thinner that's available, but it's still pretty non-toxic, and it's pretty cool. I wanted to have some weathering on it. I didn't want it to be pristine, and I didn't want it to be too heavily weathered. So I did some paint chipping on the main straight areas, but I also ended up doing some on the California Sage, but I couldn't do the same sort of chipping because lacquer, once it dries, tends to be pretty strong. The lacquer paint is a pretty nice bond, so you can't actually chip it in the same way usually. This took it wasn't that long, but this is probably the longest part from the painting side of things. It took a fair while just sort of mucking around, trying to get this sorted, and a lot of actual sort of planning before getting to that stage, because I have a tendency to like to just jump in, go by the seat of my pants, and not it's all feel. And that's great, but sometimes I can just get myself into lots of trouble doing that. You can go just too far and suddenly go, oh, I've gone too far, but that's the thing, now you've gone too far. So I actually spent a fair bit of time thinking, how did I actually want to weather this before I actually started doing anything? I decided that the engines would probably suffer a fair amount of weathering, more than anywhere else on the vehicle. That heat generated, the A-Wing is known for its speed. It's a fast maneuverable fighter, but it's really its first attribute is speed. So I thought, well, there's all this energy being expended constantly through those engines. There's got to be there's got to be a payoff for that. So I did more weathering on sort of those nacelles surrounding where the engines would be. And I wanted to sort of keep the paint scheme sort of linear. I wanted the outsides to be the sage and the center line to be the blue. And that main piece at the front there is the underbelly gear door section, front gear door section. Clicking it in. Now, I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, and I don't know how the A-Wing is meant to be. The main the main piece sits nice and flush, but slightly below edges of the wing area, and it's definitely where it wants to be. It doesn't want to sit level with the top. It wants to sit down, which makes me think that Bandai is well aware of that, which also makes me think that must be how the one is, like the studio one too. It's not all level. It must be sunken down, because it clicks in. It's not like you have to fight it and that. It doesn't do anything weird. It goes where it exactly wants to be, but it's not flush with the top. By this point, we're getting most of the stuff together. The centerpiece is on, the cockpit's in, gun mount sections are in the side. You can see the black hole there that the side guns go into, and she's really starting to head towards completion. That's the bottom. So we've now got all the main pieces in, and that bit that's missing, the two bits that are missing there are the panels for the gears. If you're doing gear down, you will put different pieces in. I'm doing gear up, so that's what they are for. You get two pieces that go in there, and a centerpiece, that little hole at the back there, that's where the stand goes, because Bandai gives you a stand. That's cool. I decided that there was one spare piece. Well, it's not spare, but it's that one extra piece that goes on the far side there, which is the silver you can see. And originally I decided I was going to just paint it sage, because I knew it was going to be on the wing structure. But then I decided, no, you know what, I'll do one silver, like it's a thrown-on panel, or a panel from another A-Wing that they've had to use. Probably 95% complete now. The nose is on. Everything to do with the cockpit's done. All the engines are now done and on. Everything fits nice. Pilot almost done. He's not complete at this point. I painted him the same color as the wings, the sage, because that way he matches. So I was working on some basic colors. You're not going to see him, and you don't. Once everything's on and in, you really don't see much of him at all. So I did paint his helmet a bit, and I did paint his chest unit and some areas like that. I didn't leave him just all one color. Having to spend ages and ages trying to make this pilot great, which you can. He's not 100% awesome, but he's pretty decent. You just don't see enough of him to, I think, warrant that time. And that's the two parts of the gun. The gun actually has three pieces to it, and they just slot in at the top. Probably could get away with not following the instructions here. The instructions show putting the two housing pieces in, those two, and then the front. I think you could probably actually get these two pieces in much easier before you put them into the into that housing, because the last thing you actually want is to have to apply pressure or too much. The one thing that's nice, and if you haven't built the A-wing and you're gonna, pay attention. There's a tab. You can see it on the top one. I think that it's slightly different on the bottom one, or it's reversed. So don't just get it and try to push it in and go, why is it not working? Because you could actually push or bend the housing, or worse, the area that it connects to on the inside. But the left and the right are not the same piece. They're slightly different. Not by a drastic amount, but they're slightly different. So if you haven't built it and you're up to that stage, pay attention, because there's a left and a right. And there she is, finished. At this point, the cannons are now completely together, and I went with a blue base, as if it's flying over water. I decided to do like a water base rather than the Death Star or Star Destroyer. It's actually the Death Star, but you could get away with it being a Star Destroyer sort of hull. I decided to use that for one of the X-Wings instead. So thanks for watching, and just going to have a few pictures here at the end. It's a great kit. It's not that expensive. I paid about under $30 for it. And it's an amazing build, great for kids, and if you're a Star Wars fan, you can build it straight out of the box. You don't have to put any paint on it. You don't have to do anything to it if you don't want to. You can just throw it together and away you go. Or you can do a lot more to it if you want. And I think that's the joy of Bandai, and that's why I really look forward to building Bandai. And I've slowed down on building some of the other kits that are more complex. It's just, for me, they've just not been quite as much fun as doing the Bandai stuff. With the B-Wing coming out, and I've got the AT-AT and the droid with Stap on the shelf, Boba Fett still to do, 2 X-Wings. It's just, there's so much good stuff from them, so I hope they're going to keep releasing, and we're going to see a lot more awesome stuff from them. But thanks for watching, and I hope you found this a little bit informative.